was supposed to check his tracking device and return before the storm hit Badlands National Park. But when Ranger Sam Harper didn't check in and his radio went silent in the heart of coyote country, a search was launched. What the rescue team found the next morning left them speechless, not because of what was gone, but because of what was there. A circle of prairie coyotes, lean and wild, stood guard around his unconscious body. And what happened in those lost hours before help arrived turned everything scientists thought they knew about wild instincts upside down. Ranger Sam Harper was a man of quiet resolve, known for his steady hands and sharp instincts along the rugged trails of the Badlands. Every morning, as the first light painted the prairie gold, he'd set out alone on his routine patrol through the vast, rolling grasslands. That day, like countless others, Sam's mission was simple. Check the motion sensors tracking coyote movements, ensure the trails were clear, and return before the weather turned. But as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, fate had other plans. Sam's Jeep rumbled along a dusty path, the air heavy with the promise of rain. He pulled off at a remote trailhead, the wind tugging at his jacket as he grabbed his pack. His radio crackled faintly, a distant hum of static connecting him to the ranger station. The prairie stretched endlessly before him, cloaked in an eerie stillness, broken only by the whistle of wind through the tall grass. It was on a desolate stretch of the trail, where the earth dipped into a rocky ravine, that everything changed. Without warning, Sam's boot caught on a slick patch of mud. One moment he was upright. The next, he was tumbling down the ravine slope, crashing through brittle shrubs and jagged stones. His shout was swallowed by the rising wind. When he finally came to a stop, he lay sprawled on a bed of dry grass and gravel, pain searing through his temple and chest. His radio, once a lifeline, lay shattered beside him. Unconscious, Sam was unaware of the world closing in around him. Hours passed in a cold, silent void as the storm clouds thickened overhead. When dawn broke, filtering weakly through the overcast sky, a search party led by fellow ranger Ellie Torres arrived at the edge of the ravine. They found Sam lying prone, his uniform torn, his face pale as if drained of life. But what stopped them in their tracks was the sight surrounding him. A loose circle of prairie coyotes, lean, wiry creatures with eyes that gleamed like amber in the morning light, stood silently around his body. The scene was almost otherworldly. The coyotes, led by an older female with a silver-streaked coat and a deliberate, measured gait, formed a protective semicircle, their breaths puffed in the chilly air, their gazes fixed on Sam's motionless form. Ellie, her hand trembling on her radio, dared not move. She'd trained for wildlife encounters, but nothing prepared her for this. A pack of wild coyotes calmly guarding a fallen ranger. The silver-coated female, whom Sam would later call Silver, took a slow step forward. Her eyes, sharp and ancient, held a quiet intensity that seemed to pierce the veil between human and wild. She let out a low, resonant yip, a sound that vibrated through the stillness. The younger coyotes, likely yearlings from her pack, shifted slightly, their movements cautious, but unafraid. In that frozen moment, the human world and the wild collided. No one could say how long the coyotes had been there. The search party whispered among themselves. Maybe the scent of blood had drawn them, or perhaps some primal instinct to protect the fallen. The prairie itself seemed to hold its breath as the coyotes maintained their vigil. Remarkably, their behavior wasn't aggressive. They didn't bare their teeth or lunge. Instead, they stood as sentinels, as if shielding Sam from the elements. Ellie, her voice barely audible, murmured, "They're not attacking. They're protecting him." Her words hung in the air, heavy with awe and disbelief. The search party felt a strange mix of fear, gratitude, and wonder. As the morning light strengthened, the coyotes began to disperse, slipping silently back into the tall grass. The silver female lingered longest, her gaze lingering on Sam before she, too, vanished into the prairie, leaving behind a promise that the wild, in its mysterious ways, might sometimes care for its own. When Sam finally stirred, his eyes fluttering open to a world that felt both harsher and strangely gentle, he could barely grasp what had happened. The search party carefully lifted him, carrying him to safety, unaware that this inexplicable encounter was only the beginning of a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the bond between humans and the wild. The morning after Sam Harper was rescued, Ranger Ellie Torres sat alone at the Badlands outpost, her eyes fixed on the grainy feed from a trail sensor. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she'd witnessed. At least 6 coyotes had surrounded Sam's unconscious body, 4 yearlings and 1 older female with a silver-streaked coat. None had fled when the search party approached. None had shown aggression. They had stood watch, as if bound by some unspoken vow. It defied everything Ellie had learned in her 12 years on the job. Meanwhile, at the ranger station, Sam Harper lay awake on a cot under the hum of fluorescent lights. His ribs ached, his temple was stitched, but he was alive. He stared at his calloused hands, trying to piece together the fractured moments before he blacked out. He remembered the wind, the slip, the sharp pain. Then, something else. Not a sound, but a presence. Warm, steady, breathing. He told himself it was a fever dream, but Ellie's voice in the doorway shattered that illusion. "They were there, Sam," she said, her tone unwavering. "Coyotes. They formed a ring around you. They didn't leave until we got close. The old one, she stood between us and you, like she was making sure we'd take care of you." Sam blinked, waiting for a joke that never came. "Coyotes? Prairie coyotes?" Ellie nodded, sliding a small USB drive onto the table beside him. The trail sensor caught it. Part of it, at least. By noon, the footage had spread through the ranger station and up the chain to the South Dakota Wildlife Service. The video was shaky, but unmistakable. The silver-coated female coyote, whom Sam would later call Silver, stepped from the grass, sniffed the air, and settled beside his body. 2 yearlings lingered nearby, alert but calm. When Ellie's flashlight swept into frame, the older coyote shifted, her eyes catching the light, not with fear, but with purpose. That moment, just before the pack retreated, burned itself into every viewer's mind. Within 24 hours, a local hiking blog picked it up, then a wildlife forum, and soon national outlets ran headlines like "Coyotes Guard Ranger in Badlands Miracle and Prairie Protectors, a Wilderness Mystery." Reporters called it astonishing. Biologists called it inconclusive. But to those who stood in that ravine, who saw the coyotes' steady gazes, it was something deeper, something that felt like a promise. That night, as Sam tried to sleep, fragments returned. The warmth of fur brushing his side, the soft yip of a coyote near his ear, the weight of something settling close, shielding him from the biting wind. Then a sound, not a growl, but a low, steady breath, like a sigh. He bolted upright, heart pounding. This wasn't just survival, it was intention. Sam wasn't supposed to return to the ravine. He was on medical leave, his stitches still fresh, and the Wildlife Service had requested a statement, a psych evaluation, and a strict order to avoid high-risk areas. But the pull was stronger than protocol. It wasn't curiosity or pride. It was something unfinished. So, 3 weeks after the fall, he slipped out before dawn, packed a light bag, and drove to the trailhead without logging the trip. The prairie was the same, vast, windswept, unknowable. But it felt awake. Every blade of grass seemed to lean closer. Every gust carried a whisper. Sam hiked to the ravine where he'd fallen, the slope still slick with patches of mud. A new sign stood at the trailhead. Caution. Unstable terrain. No access. He ignored it. Moving slowly, He reached the spot where they'd found him, a hollow of crushed grass and scattered stones. The air was still, no tracks or blood, but something caught his eye. On a flat rock to the right, carved into the soft earth nearby, were claw marks. 3 sharp lines, too precise to be random. They weren't fresh, but they were recent, facing inward toward the hollow, like a marker or a claim. Sam knelt, his fingers hovering over the scratches. They matched the size of the older coyote's paws. He stood to leave, then froze. On the ridge above, no more than 50 yards away, a shape stood motionless. A young coyote, lighter in coat, eyes wide and unblinking, watching him. Sam's breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition. This was one of the yearlings, grown stronger but unmistakable. They locked eyes in silence, seconds stretching into something timeless. Then the coyote took a single step forward and sat, not threatening, not fleeing, just present. It was as if it said, "I know you." Sam reached into his jacket and pulled out a small feather, an eagle feather gifted by a Lakota elder years ago. Not to lure, not to claim, but to offer something between them. He knelt, placed it gently on the flat rock, and backed away. The coyote didn't move, but its head tilted, its breath visible in the cool air. For a moment, Sam felt the same weight he'd sensed that night, the presence of something wild that had chosen not to turn away but to stay. He left the ravine quietly, didn't speak, didn't look back, but in his chest, something had shifted. The coyotes hadn't just watched him that day. They had made a choice, and now they were waiting to see what he would do with it. The next time Sam Harper returned to the ravine, he brought something with him. Not food, not equipment, but something older, heavier with meaning. A small leather pouch, worn and scratched, tied with a thin strip of rawhide. Inside was a single turquoise bead, a keepsake from a coyote pup he'd helped release from a poacher's trap 2 years earlier. The pup had never returned, but its wide, searching eyes had stayed with Sam. Somehow, it felt connected to this place, to this moment. He hiked to the same ridge, the same hollow, where he'd left the eagle feather days before. The air was sharp, the prairie damp with melting snow. Each step felt deliberate, as if the grass itself were watching. At the flat rock in the ravine, he found the feather gone, replaced by a single prairie sage sprig, its leaves carefully placed, centered, intentional. Sam's breath caught. This wasn't chance. He knelt, set the leather pouch where the sage had been, and sat on a nearby stone, waiting. The prairie stayed quiet, not silent, but alive, observant. Just as the sun dipped, casting golden streaks across the grass, the young coyote appeared. Same ridge, same steady pause, but bolder now. It stepped forward, one careful pace at a time, until it reached the rock. It sniffed the pouch, touched it with a paw, then looked at Sam, not for permission, but for acknowledgement. Then it sat, and they stayed like that, man and coyote, breathing the same crisp air for 20 minutes, until the coyote rose and slipped back into the grass. The pouch remained untouched, but accepted. Sam returned every few days, never with food, never with cameras, only presence. Sometimes the coyote came, sometimes not, but the pouch was always there, sometimes shifted, sometimes dusted with dirt, once encircled by small pebbles arranged in a near-perfect ring. Sam didn't speak of it. He couldn't. What was happening wasn't science. It was a ritual, a conversation without words. Then, on his 5th visit, the air changed. Movement stirred deeper in the grass. Not one coyote, but 2. The second was larger, older, her silver-streaked coat catching the light. It was Silver, the matriarch from the rescue, her muzzle scarred from years on the prairie. She stood behind the yearling, motionless, watching. The younger coyote nudged the pouch, then glanced at her. Silver's eyes never left Sam, steady and unyielding, carrying the weight of the day he nearly died. Sam stood slowly, one hand over his chest, not for show, but because it ached, because her gaze felt like memory itself. He understood now. This wasn't about territory or curiosity. It was about something shared, something passed down. Sam had changed. He was quieter, slower, his heart no longer in patrol logs or station briefings. It lived in the prairie now, somewhere between the claw marks on the rock and the pouch on the stone. He'd stopped talking about the incident, even with Ellie. But stories like these don't stay buried in places like the Badlands, and the wrong ears eventually heard the right whispers. Dr. Lena Voss was a wildlife biologist from Rapid City, young and driven, with a reputation for chasing the impossible. Her recent paper on social cognition in canids had gone viral, and when rumors reached her of a ranger guarded by coyotes and returning to meet them, she couldn't stay away. She made calls, got Sam's name, and showed up unannounced. It was a chilly Tuesday morning when Sam heard footsteps behind him. He'd just placed a small river stone beside the pouch, a quiet gesture, when he turned and saw her, a woman in a windbreaker, a camera slung around her neck, stepping into the ravine. His stomach sank. "You shouldn't be here," Sam said, his voice low but firm. "I had to see it," she replied, unfazed. "I'm Dr. Voss from the university. I study coyotes. I didn't ask you to come, but you didn't deny it either." Sam's eyes flicked to the ridge, sensing the shift in the air. The grass parted, and the young coyote appeared, followed by Silver. No growls, no bared teeth, just presence, assessing. Voss raised her camera, but Sam stepped in front of her. "Don't, please." The coyotes froze. Silver shifted, positioning herself slightly between the yearling and the humans. The younger one let out a soft yip, not a threat, but a warning. Sam spoke, his voice steady. "It's okay, we're not here to take, just to give." He knelt, touched the pouch, and backed away. Silver watched, her gaze piercing. After a long, still moment, she turned, the yearling following, and they melted into the grass. Voss exhaled, her voice shaky. That wasn't fear. That wasn't instinct. That was a choice. Sam met her eyes, his own hard with resolve. "Exactly. And it's not for your papers." That night, Voss sat across from Sam in his small cabin at the park's edge. She had 3 photos on her camera. Clear, perfect, undeniable. But as the fire crackled and the wind sighed through the prairie, she hesitated. "You really think they remember you?" she asked. Sam nodded. "I think they never forgot." Voss looked at the memory card in her hand, then slowly placed it into the flames. Neither spoke, but the silence said enough. Some truths were meant to be protected, not published. The first storm of the season came like a warning, thunder rolling low over the Badlands. Sam had seen the signs, swollen creeks, heavy skies. The trails were flooding, but what worried him wasn't the water. It was what lived near it. He grabbed his boots as lightning split the horizon, taking only a rope and his instincts. By the time he reached an overlook near Cedar Creek, the rain fell in sheets. The trickle of a stream had become a raging torrent. Then, downstream, he saw it. A flash of tawny fur caught in the current, small and struggling. It was the yearling coyote, no longer a pup, but too young for a flood like this. She was flailing, her paws scraping a fallen log that dammed the water. Sam didn't hesitate. He slid down the muddy bank, the current clawing at his legs. Tying one end of the rope to a cottonwood, he looped the other around his waist and plunged in. The cold hit like a fist, the water flipping him twice before he found his footing. The coyote was barely above the surface, one paw clinging to the log, her eyes wide with panic, but locked on him. She didn't snap or thrash, only watched as he fought the current to reach her. Sam hooked an arm under her, gripping the rope with his other hand. "Not today," he shouted, defiance louder than fear. Inch by inch, he pulled them toward the bank until her paws touched earth, until they collapsed together, soaked and shaking. When he looked up, Silver was there, standing on the ridge above, rain streaming down her silver coat. She didn't approach, but her breath fogged in the storm, and Sam knew she'd seen everything. He stood slowly, helping the yearling to her feet. She leaned into him, her trembling body trusting his. They climbed the bank together, and by the time they reached solid ground, Silver was gone. But her presence lingered, clear as the claw marks on the rock. That night, Sam didn't go home. He stayed at the outpost, a fire roaring, the young coyote lying just outside under the awning, not inside, but close enough to feel the warmth. She didn't run. She slept, safe, alive. When dawn broke and the rain eased, Sam opened the door. The coyote stood, looked at him, then turned and loped back toward the prairie, stronger, free. Summer came late to the Badlands that year. The last snow melted by mid-May, and the prairie trails reopened with a soft, rustling sigh. Sam Harper walked them one final time, not as a ranger on duty, but as a man preparing to release the only world that had ever truly understood him. Weeks earlier, he had submitted his resignation. No press, no farewell party, just a quiet signature and the clink of his keys left on the outpost desk. Locals whispered that something had changed him. They weren't wrong, but they weren't ready for the truth. Some stories didn't belong in headlines. Some belonged to the grass and the wind. On his last day, Sam left his cabin with only a pack, a worn journal, and the leather pouch that had never been taken, only moved. He hadn't planned to stop at the ravine on the Cedar Creek Trail, but his feet knew the way. When he reached the flat rock where he'd left the turquoise bead and eagle feather all those months ago, something was different. Not the grass, not the sky, not the hum of the prairie. It was what waited on the rock. A circle of smooth river stones, 12 in all, lay carefully arranged side by side. In the center sat a single sage sprig, its leaves fresh, as if plucked that morning. Beside it, something that didn't belong to the prairie, his ranger badge, not dropped, but placed, glinting faintly in the sunlight. Sam stepped back, his breath catching like he'd brushed against a live wire. The air thickened with something he couldn't name. Then, from the tall grass, a shadow moved. She stepped out slowly. Silver, the coyote matriarch, her silver-streaked coat lighter now, her eyes carrying the weight of years. She was alone, her gait steady but slower, calm. She didn't approach, just stood at the edge of the ravine, watching. Sam didn't move, didn't breathe, until something inside him broke free. He knelt, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." Silver blinked once, her amber eyes catching the light, then turned and slipped back into the prairie. Sam didn't take the badge. He didn't touch the stones or the sage. He opened his journal and wrote, "The prairie knew me better than I knew myself. I was never lost. I was never alone. I was chosen." That night, Sam drove away from the Badlands, his Jeep cutting through the endless grasslands under a star-streaked sky. He didn't leave empty. He carried something no one else could understand, something sacred, a bond forged not by chance or survival, but by recognition. The coyotes hadn't just guarded him that day in the ravine, nor had they simply accepted his offerings. They had seen him, and he had seen them, in a way that transcended words or reason. Sam's story didn't end in the headlines, though the whispers persisted in the Badlands. Tales of a ranger who walked with coyotes, who left behind a badge and took with him a truth too vast for the world to hold. The prairie kept its secrets, as it always had, but those who walked its trails swore the wind carried a new sound, a soft yip, a sigh, a promise that the wild would always remember those it chose.